Welcome, Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Editor's Note. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and in today's edition, we will focus on the latest vis-a-vis the diplomatic track between the Trump administration and the Ayatollah regime in Iran. Are we expected to see some type of resolution, or is this merely a facade to buy more time ahead of a potential military clash that will see undoubtedly not just the Middle East, but the entire world change? The ins and outs of this question will be discussed today, and also the implications for the broader Middle East, for Israel, for the United States, Europe, and other countries relevant to this story. But before all that, let's introduce our guest for today is retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, formerly a U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs and a senior officer at U.S. Central Command. It's great to see you, Mark.
Great to see you, Jonathan.
Let's dive right into this. Is this diplomatic track truly genuine, or are we ahead of something more kinetic?
Could be both. Certainly, I believe that the efforts on the part of the United States to reach a diplomatic solution with Iran on some key issues is very, very real. Clear President Trump wants it. He's sending his A-team in there to talk to the Iranians. And of course, if the Iranians try to pull the deny, delay, disagree, try to drag this out while in the background continuing to rebuild their nuclear capabilities, I think it could certainly lead to kinetics.
Well, let's dive deeper into the discussion right now. On the one hand, we have the United States relaying to the Iranians that they want to find some type of resolution to their nuclear program. President Trump has mentioned time and again, no nuclear bombs, but nonetheless, what does that actually entail? We do understand, just for layman's terms, a fuel cycle necessary to create nuclear capabilities or weaponize those nuclear capabilities does include also an enrichment part, which is the easiest to annul within that context. General, the Iranians are saying, no way, they're not going to give it up.
Well, remember, we're at the first inning of this long baseball game. The fact remains is we've seen the opening gambits. We're starting to see the opening positions. I don't think once everybody rolls up their sleeves, starts having direct talks instead of indirect talks, and get into the later rounds of the discussions, are we really going to know two things? Number one, what does the United States really want? And what does Iran really want to give up? And number two, how serious are both sides about moderating their positions? This is a lot easier than Russia-Ukraine. The issues that we're talking about are well known. They've been policy for the United States through the last three presidents. So there's nothing new that's being put on the table. The only question is the President of the United States willing to do more than his predecessors if we don't get what we want?
That is a significant question with pending answers. But let's talk for a moment about the discussion between Israel and the United States. The last time around, when Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, which included 12 days of conflict between the State of Israel and the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel clearly, militarily speaking, maintained the upper hand in this equation. But nonetheless, prior to that, President Trump was indicating the will to talk, and suddenly the war sparked, which obviously Israel would have never launched this war without a green light coming from the White House.
I don't necessarily agree with that, Jonathan. It could very well be that Prime Minister Netanyahu simply said, I have too much at risk. I'm responsible for Israel, not the United States of America. I've got to do what's in the best interest of the people of Israel, regardless of what the Americans believe. And it could very well be that President Netanyahu gave a view to the United States that said, we're going. If you want to come along, that's fine. We could use your help, but we're still going.
Well, that's not necessarily what I heard, since Israel did seek out a green light from Washington, or at least not a red light, which
Yep.
sometimes it goes either way. But here specifically, let's look deeper into what the Iranians are currently also doing, and that is they're trying to rehabilitate their ballistic missile capabilities. Oversaturation capabilities are naturally something that will make it very difficult to combat against. As a former planner and much more in U.S. Central Command, what type of contingencies do you see right now with the force posture already in place, much of it, in order to confront such a potential hazardous scenario in which the United States would have to effectively degrade much of those capabilities were it to launch an attack?
Yeah, first of all, let's both agree that there is probably a yellow light, not a red light, not a green light, but a yellow light, a caution light that the Americans could have indicated, but they said at the end of the day will come along. Now, in terms of planning for a attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities, my classification level ends when I die, and I have some very, very specific information that we used in our planning contingencies down in CENTCOM. So let me just say that the United States would be fully prepared to go in and go in big, far bigger than during Operation Midnight Hammer, the 12-day war. So, yes, that go big also comes with great risk, but I don't think the United States would be willing to execute that operation if they're not willing to underwrite that risk.
Good answer, General. Let's broaden the discussion for a moment. There are a couple of Iranian proxies. One is Lebanon, obviously, which is in reference to the Iranian proxy Hezbollah. Uh, the French foreign minister was just there, and Jean-Noël Barrot, during the course of which he did urge the government in Lebanon to do more, but also praise them for what they've done thus far. Uh, it seems like the Iranians are not willing to let go this piece of territory, and in the event that a potential war breaks out, a high intensity conflict between the United States and Iran, they would expect Hezbollah to join forces. But according to all people involved that I've had the opportunity to talk with, they don't see Hezbollah necessarily joining the fight. It does not mean that they won't cheer for Iran, their masters in Tehran, namely, but their capacity to really impact the equation will be so meager that they would rather survive whatever is about to break out. This does not go. I mean, this equation is not the same for the Houthis in Yemen or Hashd-e-Shaabi in Iraq, but nonetheless, I'd like to hear your take on this.
No, I agree with you, Jonathan. I think if there was an all-out war, first of all, I sort of deny or disagree with this notion that it's going to be this apocalyptic regional conflict. And we can talk about that later. But in the issue of Hezbollah, they know that they're on their back feet right now. Uh, and but I would expect a few performative rocket shots and missile shots. But it would be very clear that if Israel and the United States are willing to wipe out a Iranian nuclear capability with a force 10x to 100x what went in during the 12-day war, I think they'd be pretty clear that if the United States and Israel are willing to use that level of power against Iran, uh, it would be a sideshow to do the exact same thing to Hezbollah.
Absolutely. And both have obviously American blood on their hands. We all remember the more than 240 Marines that were killed during the heinous bombings against barracks in Lebanon back in the 80s, and subsequently also the attacks against the French embassy, the American embassies, and all those who have lost their lives in service in Lebanon proper by this Iranian proxy Hezbollah. And obviously, they received their orders from no other than the Islamic Republic in Iran. So, this is something that needs to be taken into account. There were, of course, more than 500 U.S. service members who had lost their lives due to the various Shiite organizations in Iraq since the war in Iraq. Obviously, there were various clashes that took place, insurgency, and so on. I'd like to hear your take on this because it does seem that Hashd Shabi in Iraq is not necessarily going to sit out this time. Is that something you would agree with?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we can credit the Iranian-backed PMFs with killing 500 Americans. I think we need to credit Iran with killing 500 Americans. The fact remains is most of those deaths came from weapons, the explosively formed penetrator in particular, that were handed off, developed and handed off from Iran to those proxies.
Absolutely.
Yes, we can go against those proxies for pushing the button, but the mechanism, the capability, the equipment, and the explosives were all provided by Iran. This is more than simply a separate proxy operation. This is a direct linkage to Iran and its Quds force inside the IRGC. It's a good question, and oddly enough, I think it has to do with timing. The PMFs, the Iranian-backed militias, the factions, whatever you'd like to call them, are waiting to see how the elections turn out. Now, it's clear that one of the conditions the United States has put on the next government is you do something about the militias. Now, the real question is, will this simply be a Beirut government in Baghdad making noises about doing something about Hezbollah in the case of Baghdad, the militias, or will they in fact take some direct action? I think the difference is, I think the answer is they probably will do more against the Iraqi militias than Beirut is doing against the Lebanese militia, Hezbollah, primarily because, number one, the factions are not part of the government. They don't have a, quote, legitimate, unquote, political representation inside the government. And number two, Lebanese Hezbollah certainly have a lot more sympathy inside of Lebanon than the Iraqi factions do inside of Iraq. Everybody acknowledges that the Iraqi factions were instrumental to the defeat of ISIS. They were the first on the battlefield. Took huge numbers of casualties in that war. But in many ways, they've outlived their usefulness. They're no longer seen as protectors of Iraq because there's nobody to protect Iraq from. And last, everybody realizes that these have gone from being, quote, legitimate resistance organizations, unquote, to basically criminal enterprises. So I think that there's a lot more pressure inside of Iraq for these guys to hold their water than you would have inside of Lebanon. Now, maybe I'm
Well, if we
fooling myself.
linger
Yeah, maybe I'm fooling myself, but that's sort of the sensing I have on the ground.
If we linger a moment on Iraq, I tend to agree with what you have to say right now. But when it comes to Hashd Shabi, I mean, this we're talking here about 67 militias. Out of them, 46 specifically are Shiite militias that operated in close proximity with the RGC and RGC Quds Force, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. And within that context, they were fighting for their survival. It's not like they just, out of their goodwill, started fighting the Islamic State. No, the Islamic State was exterminating the Shia living in Iraq. They were working to establish demographic
Yep.
shifts, very similarly to what the Shia did in Syria and in Lebanon. So neither side are the good guys, quote unquote. They're both terrible and with heinous aspirations of not just regional dominance, but global dominance, working to exterminate the other side. Iran happened to gain the upper hand because of the US led coalition to counter the Islamic State, namely Operation Inherent Resolve, was effective in degrading the Islamic State on one end, and they just utilized that advantage and momentum to their benefit. Now, in this election, which is going to have a lot of implications, obviously, uh, if there's a negotiated solution between the United States and Iran, it's even going to have more implications and impact. If it's a military solution, there are also going to be implications to a lesser degree, but nonetheless, we have two main contenders, General. One is Mohammed Shia al-Sudani. The other one is Nour al-Malki. The former is the current, who is also more aligned with the United States, versus Nour al-Malki, who is very much aligned with the Islamic Republic of Iran, aligned with the Shiite militias, a former leader at that, who President Trump said, if you elect this person, the United States is out of there.
No, I completely agree. There is some surprising noise coming out of Iraq right now that they're actually trying to find a graceful exit for Prime Minister Maliki at this point. I don't believe it. That is not Maliki's style. He wouldn't have thrown his hat in the ring if he wasn't in it to win it. Maliki, however, is also seen, has a past fighting those militias. He instigated and led the Charge of the Knights that destroyed the Jaish al-Mahdi in the south during its term. So it's not without precedent. Now, perhaps I misunderstood what you said, but it sounded like you were inferring that the Shia militia sort of were free riders on top of CJTF Operation Inherent Resolve and took more credit than they were due. Did I understand that to be correct?
I don't think that they took more credit than they were due. I think that they capitalized on the gains in northern Kurdish regions, as well as the fact that Operation Inherent Resolve was providing a lot of air support and various capabilities into the theater that ultimately brought about the downfall of the Islamic State, rather than the Shia militias who were coordinating with the Iraqi government, operating at its behalf, and in many aspects also coordinating with the United States at that, of course, the scope of which you're more familiar with than I am, but nonetheless, the collaborative efforts did prove to give place for this term, the enemy of my enemy happens to be my friend, despite the enemy of my enemy being also my enemy.
Yeah, and all I would say is, in the end, you were correct. But at the beginning, it was a long, long time, probably about the space of a year before the United States really kicked in support uh, uh, in the counter-ISIS fight, or even being part of the counter-ISIS fight. First, there was the dilemma of just, do we need to help the Iraqis that have obviously we've left? Do we want to go back in? Remember, Barack Obama campaigned on getting out of Iraq. And even when it was apparent to people like me that he could get another sofa if he wanted it, he chose not to. I mean, he wasn't going to walk away from his campaign promise. So he satisfied both constituencies. On the left, he said, I got out. On the right, he said, well, I tried my best, but I couldn't get another sofa. So there was a lot of debate inside of Washington, D.C., 2 years later after we had left about re-entering Iraq. And while that was happening, ISIS was barreling down on Baghdad. I was there. I remember that vividly. Uh, I could tell some stories that aren't worth talking about here today, but the fact remains is, did the U.S. finally come in and provide the impetus for the Iraqi forces to get back into the fight? Yes. Did the United States contribute a lot, not only in terms of air support, but troops on the ground? Yes. But there was still a gap in time that it was ISIS versus the Shia militia. In fact, talking to a very, very senior militia leader at that time about discussing with the Americans about some foreign military support, FMS, foreign military sales support that would have come quickly. He looked at me and said, "Hey, that's too slow. I prefer the Iranian FMS system than I do to the American system, and I don't have time to wait for it." And he was right. So I think that the as the old story or the old saying from the man who shot Liberty Valance said, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. The legend inside of Iraq is that the Shia militia were first on the battlefield. They were the ones that held the line while the Iraqi forces were retreating en masse. And frankly, Jonathan, what I'd say is if it had not been for the Shia militia blocking ISIS from taking Baghdad, you would not be seeing Iraqi flags on the flagpoles. You'd be seeing the black flag of ISIS on the flagpoles inside of Baghdad. Now, that may be the legend. There is some fact to it. And I think that's where the only reason the Shia militias, the Iranian-backed militias, have been able to survive is basically on past victories and past legends.
Indeed. Well, let's divert our attention to another actor that may well join the fight in the event of a battle between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran, namely Ansar Allah, dominated by the Houthi tribe, a tribe that has asserted its dominance on other Yemeni tribes, and therefore, right now, when referring to Ansar Allah, it's referring actually to the Houthi tribe and multiple other tribes that are under its guidance and leadership. And they are rather a surrogate of the Iranians, not necessarily a proxy. They do what they will, but at the same time, they have aligned themselves with Tehran 100%. And are intending to join with full force, and they have showcased the support of hundreds of thousands of people rallying the streets of Sana'a, their capital in Yemen, just this weekend, and proclaiming under the guidance of Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the Houthi tribe, that they will join the fight were Iran to be attacked, namely ending yet again freedom of navigation in the strategic Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and launching direct ballistic missiles, drones, and other type of munitions granted to it by the Islamic Republic of Iran to be directed to U.S. allies and partners, bases, including Israel, of course, in the region. General, you have established Task Force 151 in the past. It is just south of Yemen to combat Somali piracy. The task force right north to you in the Red Sea, namely Task Force 153, that the United States established together with Egypt to counter such a scenario, has failed miserably since the Houthis joined the Iranian multi-front war against Israel on the 17th of October of 2023. What can be done in this scenario? Obviously, the U.S. is collecting intelligence and such and is well prepared for such a contingency, much more than it was back in the day. But is there something more that we need to take into account here?
Well, it's quite simple. How much are the coalition nations willing to put boots on the ground? The fact remains is the Houthis are like an anthill. You hit the anthill and the ants just keep running around. And you don't have enough intel assets in the sky to be finding all of these locations and all of these capabilities. They have become masters at shoot and scoot. They learned that primarily against the Saudis and the UAE. Their tactics on the ground are candidly pretty good about evading high technology armies. The one area where I think that we have not done enough is to work with the forces of the legitimate government of Yemen to be running a counterinsurgency against the Houthis. That is even more difficult than trying to get the Lebanese army to attack Hezbollah. But unless there's something on the ground chasing these guys down, destroying their launch sites, destroying their capabilities, as well as putting up both a waterborne and ground uh, armada against the entry of any kind of weapons into Yemen. I think we're just going to see more of the same. Without boots on the ground, without the ground intelligence, without the ground combat, and candidly, a cordon sanitaire around Yemen for any types of weapons, uh, I don't think it's going to look much different than it has since October 7th.
Indeed. Well, the Saudis are dominating the areas that are not under Houthi control. And when the Emiratis attempted just recently to start arming some of the tribes in order to prepare for a battle against the Houthis, the Saudis went out of their way and actually struck those weapons shipments. What is going down there? And we don't have very much time for that
Yeah.
answer. So give it in a teaser, so to speak.
Al-Qaeda. Those tribes are affiliated, which is the reason we worked with the Houthis for years and years. Those tribes, many of them are back, operate under an Al-Qaeda ideology, and clearly the Emiratis want to use them, and clearly the Saudis see them as a threat.
Clearly, unfortunately, we are at the end of today's edition. We are prayerfully hoping for a good outcome, irrespective of the decision making, both in Washington and in Jerusalem, the coordination between the two nations, and whatever happens. We are hopeful for a successful operation, particularly one that will not see any of the service members in the United States military or the Israeli military or any of the allied and partners militaries facing any hardships or bodily damage. General, last sentence from you, please.
I hope diplomacy works. I don't expect the diplomacy to work. So I think we ought to keep doing our kinetic, tactical, operational planning.
Well, everybody is preparing for the moment of order, so to speak. Well, General Mark Kimmitt, thank you very much for all of your insights today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
I'd like to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
For more of TV7 Israel's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.